Welcome back to Armchair Author Chats. I'm your host, Rita Slanina, and today we're here with an amazing space opera sci-fi author, Martin Leguene. Let's bring him on. Hello, Martin. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. I appreciate you being here. So, give me a little bit about your recent work, which is Pulsar Sky. This is I just love, we were talking backstage about this. I'll let you explain to the audience this title.
I'm working on this project, Pulsar Sky. It's basically Space Lady Indiana Jones is the idea. And it's about a woman who finds a derelict spacecraft which has something exceedingly valuable on, but she is betrayed and left for dead. And it comes at the same time that the military locate a legendary starship called the Trafalgar, and they find themselves in a race into who's going to be the first one to find it.
Oh, that's awesome. And explain a little bit to the audience how you're releasing this, because I think this is a really, really well laid out way that you're doing this. I love what you're doing.
So it's being serialized on a site called Royal Road, which is mainly focused on things like progressive fantasy and lit RPG, which is sort of like stories that revolve around video game mechanics. Whereas I'm a bit outside the main window of what they're interested in, so it was a bit of a risk, but it's been really surprising how much people have been getting on board and enjoying it. And we're releasing chapters 3 times a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We're going to be launching a Patreon soon as well, where we will then let people read ahead of what's already been released. And it gives people an opportunity to support me as an author as the books come together before doing a self-published release next year.
That's amazing. I love that strategy. That's lovely. It's beautiful. It gives your audience something to look forward to, and even gain a new audience who gets to see something they haven't seen before, especially on that website, Royal Road. So let's start with some magic. Can you share the moment you first felt the spark to write Pulsar Sky? Or it could be your other title as well, McMurdo Rift. It could be either one.
So in July 1545, there was a warship that Jeff just left port in Southampton called the Mary Rose. And the king was in attendance because the French were attacking. Bear with me. We're getting to the book, don't worry.
I love it. Yeah, go for it.
This ship sank, and no one really knows why. And in 1982, it was brought back up to the surface and put in a museum. And in 2022, I was watching a documentary about this. And you had the Royal Engineers, who are a military team, who were brought in for the logistics of, finding a big wooden boat that was at the bottom of the sea, in salt water, having to get it back up to the surface in one piece. But they were under the jurisdiction of a civilian archaeological group. And there was a lot of tension, in part because the British military were engaged in a war in the South Atlantic at the time, and the engineers felt like they weren't, doing their part there. And I thought that's a really interesting set of conflicts and set of character dynamics. And I just thought, yeah, let's put this in space, and you've got an interesting book. And I actually did keep the name Mary Rose for one of the ships, just as a nod towards that, and changed the ship they're looking for to the Trafalgar.
So I love that. So you took a historical situation and took that and put it in space. But of course, you made your own adaptations and creative choices. I love that. I love that. That's amazing. So, can you give us a sneak peek behind the curtain about your writing routine?
So basically, all my writing is done in sprints. I read a book a couple of years ago talking about this idea of being really analytical, and you set a timer for 5 minutes and you write, and you've turned everything else off, and then you count your words and work out how many words you're getting a minute, and then extend it to what you're comfortable with. And it's one of those things, you hear it and you go, well, that can't work. How could writing for 10 minutes writing for an afternoon? But what happens is, if you go, I've set aside this afternoon to write, you never know, have you done your writing now? Or, do you need to do more? Whereas if you say, let's do 3 sprints, you'll find overall, uh, if you're me, which many people aren't, and, you do you, um, but I certainly found that I got more words down in a way that I was, not forcing myself to feel like I always needed to be writing.
Yeah, that's great. So, you isolated the sit down writing time. Now, do you do these sprints live? Do you host sprints as well, or do you just do this privately for your writing
I've
routine?
been known to, but mainly I just do it privately.
Okay.
When I'm really on form, I'll do one sort of first thing in the morning, one at lunchtime, and then one in the afternoon, and that really gets an insane amount of words down. But I try to get just two in a day, and then that usually gives me about half a chapter.
Oh, nice. So, do you find that you are, do you can get more words down in the morning, in the afternoon, or the evening? Is there any time of day you prefer, or you just set this time of 3 times, I'm going to sprint this amount and go for it? Doesn't matter what time of the day.
I try and spread it out as much as I can. Like I never thought I'd be a morning writer, but I've actually forced myself sort of to try some early. Not, I'm not one of those people who wake up at 5 a.m. because that's madness.
Guilty.
But if I have to wait until sort of 6 or 7 at night before I start anything, I'm not going to have as much of a productive time. So if I can spread it throughout the day, I think that's the thing that works
Yeah.
best for me. Or if I'm finishing work at about 4 o'clock, I can get a couple of sprints in um, late afternoon. That's generally quite a good time for me. I always loved the idea of being one of these writers that could sit up through the night tapping away. But
Oh,
even when I was, young and didn't have a bedtime, after it got past 10 o'clock, my mind wasn't there for it.
same. I can feel you with that. I'm a little envious of the nighttime writer, right? I'm
Mm.
8 p.m. is my sleepy time, but so your characters feel real. Lieutenant Commander Nathan Chase, I really like him. Do you secretly borrow traits from people you know, or purely imaginative?
I'd never borrow traits from one person and make that a character because that's just a recipe for disaster waiting to happen. But I do like to mix and match various people and take elements and just use it to like pepper on a detail rather than just taking someone wholesale and then having a massive fallout with my wife. Why am I in your book?
Well, that's fair.
Mhm.
So, can you share any funny or unusual stories that happened while you were writing or promoting your book?
This is one of those things that I really had to be like, no, I'm really boring. It's nothing interesting happens. I
You're
just
not
type
boring,
words
Martin.
out.
Come on, spill
Um, but when I launched the serial, a couple of my beta readers were really supportive and just jumped over and posted reviews straight away. And they signed up for the site and said, guys, this is really good. You're going to like it. And I noticed on the message board that some do-gooder had been like, oh, it looks like these are fake reviews because they've not posted on the site before and they really like the book. And I was just like,
Oh
I just went into panic stations and I was like, what do I do? And I was like, let's just wait it out and see what happens. And the moderator came in and was just like, we see this all the time. Obviously, people are supporting the author and it helps the site overall. And I'm like, okay, that's fizzled out. That's fine. And then I realized that through being notified, he then went and read the first chapter that had been posted and left a 5-star review and was just like, this is really good. And, because he's like someone that's, long established on the site, that was like the best publicity I could, I couldn't have paid for better publicity.
Right? All news is good news, right? That's awesome. So writing isn't always easy. We have tough days sometimes. So how do you push through those or even writer's block?
I have a rule, which
Okay.
is 10-minute rule. So if I'm having a day where I just don't want to write, if I'm having a day where I just don't want to write, I just don't write. I think there's a lot of people who are like, I write every day, even when I'm sick. I'm like, don't write when you're sick. That's not going to make you better. But but what I don't want is to have one of those days and have it turn into a week or more. So I have a 10-minute rule, which is you're not feeling up for writing, write for 10 minutes.
Ah,
Most of the time, you find yourself writing for more than 10 minutes. And if you don't, you've still got some words down. So if you do that every day for a week, you've still moved the story forward.
that's great advice. That's great. That's a great trick. You sort of trick yourself into saying, you know what? It's only a couple minutes. I'm just going to
Mm-hmm.
sit down. It's fine. I love that. So every author has their favorite part of writing. What scene or chapter in pick either book that you enjoyed crafting the most?
I realized, sort of going back through the McMurdo War, which is the third in our my co-authored series, which is here. When we were going over it, you tend to lay a lot of groundwork in the early chapters for everything you need later, and that can run the risk of being, what's a technical term? Boring. So I realized with that book, we kind of needed like a James Bond pre-title sequence where, the characters are in the middle of something. We kind of find them and have to catch up. And I learned with all my books going forward that you need to just open, like, not necessarily with something exciting, but with something happening with an event.
Yeah.
I've just started Pulsar Sky 2, and that opens with someone in freefall.
Ooh.
And like how can we just do something that will really, you know, give them something to worry about? And
Yeah.
you
And that
you know
speaks to the genre too, I would propose, right? Like in a
mm-hmm,
space opera, sci-fi genre, it just wouldn't even make sense to start with something, what's our technical term? Boring.
mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, you don't want to start with someone waking up.
Yeah. You're like, yeah, I've seen that done before, but yeah, it wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
work in your genre. I love the approach that you have there, opening up with the free falling.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. So, publishing a book is no small feat. What was your biggest aha during the publishing process?
um there was a guy called Chekhov, who was a Russian playwright in the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
And I find myself, reading lots of author advice and tips and tricks and whatnot. And most of the time, you're just like, it's either really obvious or so specific as to not be useful. Um, but there's this thing called Chekhov's gun, and I'm sure most people have heard of it, but it's often misunderstood. And what Chekhov said was that if you have a gun on the mantelpiece in Act 1, it needs to be fired in Act 3. And it's all about, setting up your payoffs, which, is one of the biggest secrets to a good story. But people misunderstand it as meaning you need to fire a gun if you show one. What it actually means is you need to show one if you fire one. And if you go through the end of your book and look for any opportunity to mention things early on, it just ties it together
Mm,
in a way that's so much more satisfying.
I love that. So if your book were to be, or any of your books were to be adapted into a movie, who would you dream cast in a lead role?
There's a guy called William Goldman who wrote The Princess Bride and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and he always talked about when he was writing movies in the 70s and 80s, he'd always imagine actors from like the 30s and 40s.
Oh,
Because if you imagined who you hoped to cast, that would that would show on the page, and if you offered it to other people, they might not go for it. And what I try and do is cast actors in my head who might be the sort of people who would be offered the roles, or who might have been, if it was being made, 30 years ago or 20 years ago. Um, so Lieutenant Commander Chase, I had the image of Sam Witwer, who was on Battlestar Galactica,
mm-hmm.
and he also does a load of animation voices. But he's young, shaved head, military type. And then our other lead is Grace Dakota, who was the Space Lady Indiana Jones. And I pictured Kat Dennings because my wife
Yes.
was watching a lot of her sitcom at the time, and it just stuck.
Those are
But I find it
great
really helps.
choices.
I find it really helps to have someone that you can just go, they've got blue eyes, or they've got brown hair. You don't want to paint such a description that everyone goes, well, yes, obviously, but not, but just enough
Like
just
an
to have that short.
essence,
Yeah.
right? An essence of the person, not that like every little. So we all have a good story or a nonfiction book. What's one book, not your own, that you would recommend?
I would say Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir,
Mm.
which he was the same guy that wrote The Martian. It came out a few years ago, and it's one of those sci-fi books that a lot of people who would never touch sci-fi have actually gone, oh wow, this is really good, and I want to check out more. And it's also one of those books where the audiobook offers a different experience to reading it. And Ray Porter does a fantastic job narrating it.
Oh, I have to check that one out for sure. That sounds great. So balance is key. How do you juggle writing with your other responsibilities or interests?
Basically, I start by coming up with remarkably unachievable goals. Um, you know, I just say I'll publish 8 books next year, I'll publish 6 books next year, and then figure out what I'd actually have to do every day to achieve it. And when it becomes a grinding impossibility, scale it back.
Sounds familiar. I feel like I can relate to that. I guess that, yeah, I can relate to that. Not even gonna excuse it. I'm with you there on that one. So a fun bonus question:
Mm-hmm.
what's your favorite writing snack or drink?
Um, Usually I'll have some crisps.
Ooh,
The thing that's done over here is, if you're down the pub with a couple of friends, you'll get a packet of crisps, and then you sort of tear the whole bag open so everyone can just go for it. So I'll do that just at my desk and just have some crisps and then a cup of tea.
I love that. I love that. And then one more for fun: if your life were a book, what would the title be?
He's too handsome to be that humble.
Ooh, I love it! Thank you, Martin, for being here. I appreciate you so much for doing this with me. Martin Lejeune, everybody. Please leave the audience with where they can find you and your books.
So you can find my co-written books at bradleylejeune.com, and you can find Pulsar Sky at Royal Road. Just search for Pulsar Sky and you can dive right in, read it for free.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin, so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And that wraps up another episode of Armchair Author Chats. Thank you guys so much for being here, and we will see you next time. For more information, links will be in the description below and also in the show notes on the podcast. If you like this interview, please like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to share this video.